This is TWiT.
Oh, Google. They're at it again. Stadia, 3 years old. Google has announced they are shutting it down, their streaming gaming service. I guess really the only question is whoever thought Stadia would survive. The good news is they are giving you your money back. Why did Google, Alex, even think it could get into gaming? What was the process there?
Well, I think that what we're seeing now is this demarcation between old Google and new Google.
Yeah.
And old Google said, let's experiment with everything we can, throw money behind it, because why not?
Right.
And that's how you end up having a thing like Stadia get funded in the way that it got funded and become a big prog of Google's strategic vision, is because they were going to make every experimental project part of that vision. And eventually some of it would stick. And that would be the, potential next big reinvention for Google.
Did Google get, financial responsibility? I mean, did they start getting, did they grow up? Or?
Well, that's what I think. That's exactly what I think we're seeing right now. And the canceling of Stadia is like maybe just the beginning, right? We had Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google and Alphabet, at Code a few weeks ago saying Google needed to get 20% more efficient.
Yeah.
And I think that rather than look at this as Google's bet on gaming, I think we can really see this as a signal for where this company is going, and maybe where all of big tech is going, which is that those experimental projects that used to get the money because, again, why not? They're not going to get the money anymore. And I think this is going to do two things. One, it's going to bring needed focus to a lot of these companies. But two, it's going to open the door for companies who would have otherwise been in these experimental areas and gotten wiped out by big tech to start competing with big tech in a way that they haven't been before. So I think this is, again, it's just a very dynamic, interesting time for big tech. And Stadia is one example of what we're seeing in terms of the change that's just going to accelerate, I think, over the next few months.
Do you think, Cory, it's maybe also trepidation about government regulation, that maybe Google's saying we should pull some of the tentacles back in?
I mean, I don't think that so I think that merger scrutiny is a lot easier to imagine the state imposing than merger review and unwinding. Unwinding mergers is really hard. It's very expensive and it takes a long time. I think it's probably a necessary corrective. And I do have one weird trick that we can talk about later for how I think we could do a lot of it very quickly. But merger scrutiny is far more likely. And since they didn't buy Stadia, I don't think they would be worried about that. But I did want to say that, it's underappreciated the extent to which Google bought its way to glory instead of inventing its way to glory. This is a company that's had 1.5 internal successes. They made a great search engine and a pretty good Hotmail clone. All of the other things that they built internally crashed and burned. And all of the successes that they have are things they bought from someone else. And this is just the latest example, right? Google Video stank. YouTube succeeded. Google couldn't build a mobile OS, but Android came along. And people will say, that Google Photos is an internal success. And it's true, but it's an internal success because it comes bundled on Android, which Google bought from someone else.
And they bought Picasa, which is a lot of the back end as well. I'm looking at the stuff Google's purchased starting in 2001 when they bought Deja News. I forgot about that.
Deja News.
Yeah, remember Deja? And Blogger, of course, was their third big acquisition. They bought AdSense. They didn't make that up. They
their whole ad tech stack, their server management, their mobile platform, their video platform, customer service, HR software, like all of it, their docs platform, all came from other companies.
Yeah.
Calendar.
What about Chrome? I mean, what about the browser?
Chrome, you're right. Chrome is a browser they did build internally. You're right. That's an omission. Thank you.
And the person
I take it back.
that led that project is, of course, the CEO today. Sundar was in charge.
2.5 successful products. You're absolutely right. But still, I mean,
an increase of 30%,
and I don't mean to be, I don't mean to be flip here, right? It's also true of lots of other companies that they're buying their way to glory. And the reason I bring that up, because you asked me about antitrust, is that historically companies were prohibited from both merging with major competitors and also buying nascent competitors that they might neutralize on their way to becoming a threat. And the modern antitrust that was practiced for the 40 years of kind of Reaganomics that seems to be coming to a close was extraordinarily tolerant of acquisitions as a growth strategy, but as I say, I think that's coming to a close. In the UK, the Competition and Markets Authority is challenging, even small acquisitions like Facebook buying Jiffy, which I refuse to call Giphy, I think that you're going to see more of this, and I think it's a necessary corrective. I mean, the extent to which VCs have become effectively like corporate recruiters who basically say, all right, we're gonna put a little money into a startup whose purpose is to basically produce a postgraduate portfolio piece that we're going to pretend is a product just to prove that they can work together as a team. And then a tech company will buy them, throw away the product, and just put them to work. And the VC's equity will just be like a finder's fee. It's a grotesque and wasteful way to conduct business, to say nothing of to get innovative products into the market.
I'm just looking at the list of acquisitions Google has made. The many great companies that I've loved when they were around that have basically disappeared. Picasso is a good example. Jaiku is a good example. You can go on and on and on. They've basically been a graveyard. FeedBurner. Grand Central, which became
FeedBurner's still in there.
Yeah, and so is Google Voice as Grand Central. Although part of the problem with Google killing stuff is it makes people nervous about adopting Google services because there's always this risk that Google's going to lose interest. So Alex, you're saying this is kind of a salubrious adjustment of their financial maturity, but it's also risky, isn't it?
I do think it's risky. Yeah, I think this is I made this point in Big Technology a couple weeks ago, talking about how you might end up seeing stuff that Wall Street likes a lot in the short term. Things like greater profitability. They might even make some offensive moves to try to take out some competitors. But in the long term, I think focusing on profitability, especially when it comes to big tech companies that are 10, 20, 30, 40 years old, leaves them vulnerable to outside challenges in a way that they weren't before.
Google is at least trying to make people whole who bought into Stadia. They're going to refund your fancy controller and any games you bought, which is actually a big deal because you had to buy the games to play them on Stadia. But they are not going to refund your subscription fees. And there are some people who are a little miffed about Google pulling the plug, like a YouTuber named It's Color TV, who says he had devoted 5,907 hours to building up a character in Red Dead Redemption 2, a character which will be lost. That's 246 days. Lost in January when Google pulls the plug because there's currently no way to transfer that character to your own copy of Red Dead Redemption.
I'm sorry about it. Like for folks who think that it's a good idea to invest in products on other people's platforms without thinking that there's a risk that the platform might pull the rug, it's absurd at this point. Every single thing that people build on one of these big tech platforms, you have to understand that if for some reason they decide that they don't want to support it anymore, it's done. And this
but you don't have do you have a choice is the problem. Right? I mean, where do you go if you're not going to build on? At this point, you can't build on any. It's YouTube or TikTok. My son is 2.1 million followers on TikTok. Is starting to build a career as a TikTok creator. But it's not like you could do that, on your own blog anymore, right?
Yeah, of course, it's different.
And even
by
if
the
you
way,
do,
congratulations to him.
Yeah, he's doing great.
But I also think that you do it. You do it with the understanding that it might just be a moment in time, and I think we all have to be okay with that when we're on these other platforms because there's no other way around it. They are also, by the way, I would say TikTok is providing that opportunity for your son to, create that business.
It's a great opportunity.
Without it, it wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways. But all this stuff really needs to be viewed as, potentially temporary situations because that could always flip over time. And often it does.
I agree with your cautionary note there. I do think that when we say there's no other way, you're right that there is no other way right now, but it's not like there's no conceivable other way, right? Like when RSS was designed, at its core was this idea of blocking lock-in and orphaning and so on.
Yep.
So, you know, there's an XML directive you can put with RSS that says this feed is permanently moved to a different address. So if you and your hosting company part ways, you just send that directive out. The next time a podcatcher pulls down that XML file, it goes, oh, I'm just going to relocate my bookmark for this to a different server, and you can just take your audience with you. I understand why YouTube hasn't built that, but I don't understand why we shouldn't want them to build it, right? You know, like if we're going to get a better deal for creators from YouTube, one of the ways that we'll do that is by YouTube having a legitimate fear that if they give creators a bad deal, that those creators will go elsewhere. It's a separate issue to the one about this Red Dead Redemption character, but again, at least within a single game, it's easy to see how those stats could be moved over. I mean, this is just a small database entry, but I think that firms don't like doing this because they like their app store to be like a sole portal into payments and other sources of value. And if they do create that interoperability, there is that possibility that customers will jump ship, right? If they're taking a 30% rake or a 15% rake or whatever it is, Stadia was taking out of Red Dead Redemption's publishers, the inability to port a character is a feature and not a bug. It's not a technical challenge. You know, YouTube could disclose to Red Dead Redemption all of that material and give the publishers the technical means to move that character over.
It's a small file. That's all.
But they just choose not to.
Right.
Don't you think that if you spend the money creating this stuff, you should be able to make the rules? Let me give an example, like brick and mortar store, right? If you have a restaurant, and you shouldn't just you'd be required to store all the person's food preferences so that they can, then go to another restaurant and basically mimic exactly what you've been giving them without having that restaurant having to work for it. That should be something that starts from the ground up. So I mean,
but the user should be able to.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I know what my preferences are, so I can bring them with me.
Yeah.
But if somehow the restaurant was able to lock up my preferences, that wouldn't be a good situation, would it? I don't think so.
Of course, yeah. Listen, I think that like if you spend the effort, you run the business, you're spending the time.
Yeah, I'll never go to that restaurant then if they're going to steal my preferences and keep them to themselves.
I mean, let's say you go to pizza restaurant number 1, right? Mm-hmm. And you have like
they name a pie for me, the Leo pie, which has got grapes, tomatoes, pepperoni, and that's all. And then I can't take that to another restaurant because it's now owned.
That other restaurant can't. Now the other restaurant should be able to make that, but there shouldn't be a requirement to go to this restaurant and say, please send the recipe.
Download Leo's recipe
special, and then give it to the competitor. That competitor should have to figure out on their own.
But RSS is a good example because I mean this whole network is dependent on RSS. That's how podcasting works. But didn't the platforms come along and say, yeah, we're going to kill RSS, creating some sort of spurious allegation that RSS isn't working or it's not right or it's not good. They did the same thing with XMPP. They don't want interoperability, so they actively kill it, don't they?
And let me be clear, I'm not saying necessarily that I want YouTube to be forced to do this, but in the absence of meaningful competition, YouTube is neither being disciplined by firms nor by regulators. And that means that their corporate preferences carry an enormous amount of weight. And that furthermore, the lack of competition, which arises in part out of this anti-competitive vertical integration that I was just talking about, where Google just buys the companies that might later compete with it, means that it has enormous power over policy. So while I support absolutely YouTube's fair use claims, I was a staunch supporter of YouTube when Viacom was suing them for $1 billion. I think that it's not YouTube's job to make sure Viacom's business model is intact or to respect their business model. I think what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. And if you were to try and make a tool that allowed a YouTube broadcaster to take their audience with them to a rival platform, which is, I think, analogizes to the kinds of things that YouTube did when they made a tool that allowed people to take the video they liked and put it on YouTube and only have to respond to takedown and so on, YouTube would reduce you to like radioactive rubble. They'd say you violated their terms of service. They'd say you violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. They'd say you violated the DMCA, and they would put you out of business for doing unto them what they did unto others. I'm just saying that they should face the same competitive pressure that gave rise to something as innovative and great as YouTube, so that the next innovative great thing can come along.